The courtroom had seen countless cases, arguments shouted, verdicts read, lives changed in minutes. But on this morning it felt different. The air was heavy, thick with an unspoken tension that settled into every corner of the room. Even before the judge entered, people sensed that something unusual was about to unfold. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting pale rectangles across the polished wooden floor. Dust floated in the light like frozen sparks, unmoving as if time itself had slowed. Lawyers sat rigidly at their tables, their folders neatly stacked but untouched. Police officers lined the walls, uniforms pressed, expressions carefully neutral. No one spoke. No one dared to. At the center of the room stood a small boy. He was 3 years old, far too young to understand why so many adults were watching him. His feet barely touched the floor as he stood beside the defense table, leaning slightly against his guardian's leg. In his hands, he clutched a faded red toy car. One wheel was missing and the paint was chipped, but his fingers wrapped around it tightly, as if it were the only thing anchoring him to safety. His dark eyes moved slowly around the room. The ceiling looked impossibly high. The faces looked too serious. Every sound, the scrape of a chair, the clearing of a throat, made his shoulders tense. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, small and silent, breathing shallowly. Across the room, seated beside a uniformed handler, was the police dog. The dog was large, muscular, its coat a deep mix of black and brown that gleamed under the courtroom lights. It sat calmly, posture straight, eyes alert but not aggressive. Years of training were visible in the way it held itself, controlled, disciplined, waiting. Its handler rested one hand lightly on the leash, though the dog showed no sign of pulling or strain. To many in the room, the sight alone was unsettling. A police K-9 did not belong in a courtroom, especially not during a hearing involving a child. Whispers had spread in the hallways earlier that morning. Some said it was dangerous. Others said it was cruel. A few believed it was the only way to uncover the truth. The judge entered and everyone rose. The usual formalities followed, but even those felt muted. When the judge finally sat and looked out over the courtroom, his gaze lingered, not on the lawyers, not on the officers, but on the child. The judge had presided over complex cases before. He had listened to hardened criminals plead innocence and grieving families beg for justice. Yet nothing in his career had prepared him for this. A toddler did not belong here. A child this young should have been in a daycare, or a park, or asleep in a car seat, not standing under fluorescent lights, surrounded by strangers waiting for answers he could not give. The prosecutor cleared her throat but did not begin. The defense attorney shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Even the court reporter hesitated, fingers hovering above the keyboard. Silence took over the room. It was not an empty silence. It was filled with questions. What had truly happened that night? Why had this child been found alone? And why had a police dog become central to the case? The boy looked down at his toy car and rolled it slowly along the edge of the table. The soft plastic sound echoed louder than it should have in the stillness. His guardian placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, offering reassurance without words. The police dog noticed the movement. Its ears twitched slightly, but its body remained relaxed. Its gaze shifted briefly toward the child, then back forward, as if acknowledging his presence without judgment. This subtle reaction did not go unnoticed. Several people in the courtroom leaned forward unconsciously, drawn into the quiet exchange. The judge finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "Before we proceed," he said, "I want to remind everyone present that this court's priority is truth and safety." His eyes moved to the handler. "Officer," the judge continued, "your dog will remain under full control at all times." "Yes, Your Honor," the handler replied, voice firm. The handler had worked with this dog for nearly 7 years. They had trained together in all conditions, dark alleys, crowded streets, tense standoffs. The dog had never failed him. Still, today felt different. There was no criminal to pursue, no command to follow, only a child in a room full of expectations. The handler glanced down briefly at his partner. The dog did not look back. It remained focused, calm, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. The judge then turned to the attorneys. "This court understands the unusual nature of today's proceedings," he said. "But given the circumstances and the absence of conventional testimony, we will proceed carefully." A murmur rippled faintly through the gallery before quickly dying down. The child shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His toy car slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a soft clatter. Instantly, several heads turned. His body stiffened. He froze, eyes widening as if expecting something terrible to happen. Nothing did. The police dog did not move. It did not react to the noise. It did not lunge or bark. It simply remained seated, calm as stone. The boy bent slowly, picked up the car and stood again. That small moment, barely noticeable, sent a quiet wave through the room. Some exhaled without realizing they had been holding their breath. The judge watched closely. In all his years on the bench, he had learned to read people. But animals, especially ones trained to detect danger, were different. Their reactions were unfiltered, untainted by fear of consequence or desire to persuade. That was why the court was here. That was why the courtroom held its breath. Because in this room, where words had failed and assumptions had clouded judgment, everyone was waiting to see whether instinct would speak louder than testimony. And this was only the beginning. The night it all began was supposed to be quiet. It was a cool evening in a small suburban town in the United States, the kind of place where porch lights stayed on late and neighbors recognized each other's cars. Most families were already asleep when the emergency call came in just after midnight. A possible break-in reported near the edge of the neighborhood, close to a row of modest single-family homes and a wooded area beyond. Patrol cars arrived first, red and blue lights flashing against darkened windows. Officers moved cautiously, flashlights cutting through the shadows. There were signs of forced entry at one home, a shattered back window, muddy footprints near the fence line. Whoever had been there was gone, but the uncertainty lingered. That was when the call went out for the K-9 unit. The police dog arrived minutes later, stepping out of the vehicle with practiced calm. The handler clipped on the leash, gave a quiet command, and together they moved toward the house. The dog lowered its head, nose close to the ground, following a scent trail invisible to everyone else. The neighborhood felt different now, tense, alert. Curtains shifted as residents peeked through blinds. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Leaves rustled in the wind. Then from the side street near the woods, a sound broke through the silence. Crying. It was faint at first, almost mistaken for the wind. But as officers paused and listened, the sound became unmistakable, the sobs of a child. The handler raised a hand, signaling the others to stop. The police dog's ears perked, body alert but not aggressive. The handler adjusted direction, following the sound rather than the scent. Moments later, they saw him. The child stood near the edge of the sidewalk, barefoot, wearing only a thin t-shirt and pajama shorts despite the cold. His hair was tousled, his face streaked with tears. He clutched a small toy car, holding it against his chest as if it were a shield. He was alone. For a second, no one moved. An officer crouched slowly, speaking gently, trying not to startle him. But the child didn't respond. He only cried harder, eyes darting between the uniforms, the lights, and the large dog standing several feet away. The police dog did not bark. It did not pull forward. It stood still, observing. The handler tightened his grip on the leash, not because the dog showed aggression, but because the situation demanded caution. A child this young, in the middle of a police search, raised immediate concern. Where were his parents? How long had he been outside? And how close had he been to the break-in? As officers wrapped the child in a blanket and carried him to safety, questions began forming, questions that would later grow louder and darker. A search of nearby homes revealed nothing conclusive. No missing child had yet been reported. The house closest to where the boy was found appeared locked and quiet. No lights on, no response at the door. The child was taken to the station for care and observation. That was when assumptions quietly took root. Some officers wondered if the child had wandered out of a nearby home unnoticed. Others speculated that he might have been connected to the break-in, perhaps present during it, perhaps endangered by it. A few questioned why the police dog had been deployed so close to him in the first place. By morning, child services were involved. Medical staff examined him and found no serious injuries but noted signs of distress. He flinched at loud sounds. He avoided eye contact. He refused to speak beyond single words. When asked what happened, he said nothing. As the day progressed, details leaked first through whispers, then through official reports. A toddler found alone during a police search. A K-9 unit present. Unanswered questions. The story spread fast. By the time the family was located, a relative who insisted the child had slipped out unnoticed, the situation had already grown complicated. Critics questioned supervision. Others questioned police procedure. Online discussions turned heated. People took sides without knowing the full story. And somewhere along the way, the police dog became central to it all. Some claimed the dog had frightened the child. Others insisted the dog's presence had prevented something worse. A few went as far as suggesting the dog's behavior that night held clues no one had yet understood. The handler replayed the scene in his mind over and over. He remembered the child's cry, the way the boy froze when he saw the uniforms, the way his dog had stopped, alert but calm, sensing something fragile rather than threatening. The handler had trusted his partner's instincts for years. That night was no different. The dog had not detected aggression. It had not reacted as if danger were present. Instead, it had waited. But waiting did not satisfy the public. As the case moved forward, every detail was dissected. Body camera footage was reviewed frame by frame. Statements were taken and retaken. Experts debated trauma, procedure, and perception. Still, the central question remained unanswered. What had the child experienced that night? He was too young to explain, too small to articulate fear, confusion, or context. His silence became a canvas onto which everyone projected their own theories. That silence eventually led them to the courtroom. It led to the extraordinary idea that if words could not reveal the truth, perhaps instinct could. Perhaps the same police dog that had stood calmly that night could offer insight now, without commands, without pressure. As the handler prepared for court, he felt a weight heavier than any he had carried in the field. This was no chase, no arrest, no clear outcome. This was about a child, a moment in time, and a decision that could change lives. And as the night of the incident faded further into memory, one thing became clear. Whatever truth lay hidden in that darkness had followed them into the light. And the courtroom would soon demand it. After the chaos of that night, the boy's life shifted in ways that no one could have predicted. 3-year-olds were supposed to live in worlds filled with playgrounds, storybooks, and laughter. But for him, the world had become a place of uncertainty, of strange faces in uniforms, flashing lights, and whispered accusations. Every interaction was now measured, every sound magnified, every shadow potentially threatening. Social workers and child psychologists were called in to assess him. They observed his every movement, his reactions to stimuli, and the subtle signs that spoke volumes. Yet, no matter how skilled they were, his silence frustrated them. He spoke only in broken phrases or single words, often repeating them over and over as if to anchor himself in reality. When asked about the night of the incident, he could only shake his head, tears filling his eyes, or drop his toy car and bury his face in a caregiver's shoulder. His guardian, a distant relative, tried tirelessly to explain to others that the boy was gentle, kind-hearted, and entirely unaware of the chaos around him. "He's just a child," she would say repeatedly, her voice breaking. "He doesn't understand what's happening. He didn't do anything wrong." But in the courtroom, where speculation thrived and every action was analyzed, such pleas often went unheard. Doctors noted the subtle signs of trauma, flinching at loud noises, avoiding eye contact, sudden bursts of crying, and a reluctance to leave familiar spaces. They warned the court that the boy was not intentionally uncooperative. He was afraid. Afraid of the uniforms, the officers, and perhaps even the dog whose presence had loomed over him during the search. Yet, they admitted, traditional testimony would not be forthcoming. A child this young could not provide a clear narrative. Words alone would not tell the story. Meanwhile, legal teams prepared their strategies. The prosecution faced the difficult task of presenting the incident without concrete testimony from the child. They relied on statements, reports, and evidence, much of it circumstantial. Defense attorneys argued tirelessly that the boy's age and vulnerability should shield him from judgment. They painted a picture of innocence and trauma, emphasizing that the child was a victim of circumstances far beyond his comprehension. At home, the boy struggled with the echoes of that night. Even in his small room, surrounded by familiar toys and blankets, he would wake screaming from nightmares. In these dreams, flashing lights, barking dogs, and the shadows of uniformed officers merged into an endless chase. He would clutch his toy car so tightly that the paint chipped further, the wheel loosening until it nearly fell off. Yet even in the midst of fear, he sought comfort from the one constant in his life, the quiet reassurance of his guardian's presence. Outside the courtroom, community discussions began to emerge. Some criticized the authorities for involving a police dog near a toddler, labeling it dangerous. Others defended the actions, insisting that the dog had been trained for protection and discernment, and that the child had been safe throughout. Opinions spread rapidly on social media, fueled by fragments of the story, photographs of the boy, and blurred images of the K9. Some online users expressed outrage. Others expressed awe at the potential role the dog might play in revealing the truth. Inside the courtroom, every professional involved understood the gravity of the situation. For once, traditional legal processes were insufficient. The child could not testify, could not explain, and could not advocate for himself. His small gestures, the way he clutched his toy, the way he looked at people cautiously, the way he flinched at unexpected sounds, were now central pieces of evidence. Observers had to learn to read between the lines, to interpret innocence and fear without words. The K9's handler, aware of the delicate balance, prepared carefully. The dog had been a steady presence during the search, its instincts reliable, its behavior consistent. But no handler could predict how a child this young would interact with a trained police dog in a controlled environment like a courtroom. There was a risk that the boy might panic. There was a risk the dog might misinterpret sudden movements. Every precaution was taken. Officers were strategically positioned. The child was held safely by his guardian, and the judge issued strict instructions regarding movement and commands. Despite the preparations, tension mounted. Courtroom staff whispered about the unprecedented nature of the situation. Journalists, though barred from photographing or recording the proceedings, wrote hurried notes. Families and observers leaned forward, sensing the weight of the moment. No one spoke above a whisper. The entire room seemed to understand that the outcome of this meeting would be determined not by testimony, but by instinct, perception, and the subtle language of trust between human and dog. During recess, psychologists prepared notes on the child's behaviors, highlighting moments of comfort and moments of fear. They stressed that even a slight gesture, a hand reaching out, a blink, a change in posture could provide insight into the child's feelings and mental state. Lawyers debated strategies, weighing the benefits and risks of allowing the K9 to approach. Everyone knew that this was an extraordinary case, one that blurred the line between law, science, and the natural instincts of animals. When the child finally entered the courtroom that morning, his eyes wide, his grip tight on the toy car, a collective hush fell over the room. For the first time, the public, the court, and the officers could see the full impact of the previous night's events. His small frame carried an invisible weight, one that no words could express. The boy was present, but his innocence was palpable. The tension in the room was a reflection of the uncertainty he carried with him, the unspoken questions of who he was and what had truly happened that night. It became clear to everyone watching that the court was no longer dealing with mere evidence. They were witnessing the fragile intersection of human vulnerability, the instinctual behavior of a trained police dog, and the immense responsibility of the justice system. If words could not explain, if testimony could not clarify, then the truth would have to emerge in some other way. And that way would soon be revealed. The child, still silent, slowly adjusted the toy in his hands, rolling it across the table. Every eye followed the subtle movement. The dog, seated several feet away, did not move, but its gaze subtly shifted toward him. The handler remained calm, knowing that in the next few moments, instinct and trust would become the most important language in the room. All of this, the child's silence, the dog's training, the courtroom's collective tension, set the stage for an extraordinary moment, one in which the innocence of a 3-year-old and the perceptiveness of a police dog would communicate truths that no one else could articulate. And everyone in that room, from the judge to the officers to the family members, waited. They waited for a moment that would change everything. The police dog had never failed its handler. Not once. Over 7 years of service, it had been deployed to countless situations where lives were at stake. Missing children, armed suspects, dangerous searches in forests, alleys, and abandoned buildings. Every step it took, every movement was precise, deliberate, the result of years of training and instinct. Its handler often said that the dog was more than just a partner. It was a silent guardian, a force of protection that relied on senses humans could only imagine. Born in a breeding program designed for law enforcement, the dog had shown exceptional intelligence from a young age. It was calm under pressure, quick to learn commands, and unusually empathetic to humans' moods and behaviors. While some canines were trained primarily for aggression or apprehension, this dog had excelled in tracking, sensing, and reading human behavior. Its handler, Officer Thomas Miller, had chosen it precisely for that reason. "Some dogs chase the scent of danger," Miller had said. "This one chases the truth." From the moment the dog was paired with Miller, their bond was evident. In training exercises, the dog would pause when sensing hesitation in humans, adjust its pace when fear was detected, and respond not only to commands but to silent cues, tiny shifts in posture, the faintest changes in breathing. Miller often marveled at the animal's intelligence. It could sense panic in crowds, detect the faintest traces of a missing person's path, and even differentiate between someone who posed a threat and someone simply afraid. Over time, the dog had earned a reputation within the department. It had saved lives, children lost in the woods for hours, elderly residents with dementia who had wandered off, victims of violent crimes who were cornered or trapped. Awards hung in the precinct for bravery, obedience, and service. Yet what impressed Miller most was the dog's calmness in tense situations. "Most people see a big dog and think danger," he would say. "This dog sees the heart of the matter." Despite its experience, the situation in the courtroom was unlike anything it had faced. The environment was controlled, yet unfamiliar. Hardwood floors, bright lights, and rows of people all watching. No commanding officers to issue instructions. No open field for tracking. And at the center of it all, a 3-year-old child whose fear and innocence radiated in waves. Miller understood the stakes. One wrong reaction from the dog could escalate panic, endanger the child, or compromise the case. Yet the dog's instincts were sharp. From the moment it entered the courtroom, it began reading the energy in the room. Its ears swiveled slightly, eyes scanning. Every subtle movement, the judge adjusting his glasses, the guardian's hand resting on the child's shoulder, the slight shuffle of papers, was noted. To the trained eye, the dog was already assessing the child. Its nose, sensitive to countless scents, could detect the adrenaline that surged through the boy's tiny body. Its posture, relaxed but ready, conveyed both calm and awareness. In its own way, it was preparing for the encounter without anyone needing to give orders. It had done this countless times before, but never in a courtroom, never in front of so many observers, and never with stakes so emotional. Miller had briefed everyone on what to expect. "He won't react aggressively unless there's real fear or danger," Miller explained quietly to the judge. "He can sense panic, but he can also sense innocence. He reads intention, not assumption. He won't make a mistake if we let him do what he's trained to do." The courtroom had become more than a room. It was a stage for trust, instinct, and observation. The child, though small and silent, radiated tension. The officers, though trained in law and protocol, could feel the weight of the moment pressing on them. And the dog, standing just a few feet away, observed all without judgment, ready to respond in a way that words never could. Miller knelt for a moment before the dog, checking its posture, giving it a silent signal. The dog's tail remained relaxed, its eyes focused yet calm. In that instant, Miller knew his partner understood. The dog sensed that this was not a chase, not a fight. It sensed the truth of the child's innocence, the fragility of the moment, and the responsibility resting on its broad shoulders. In training exercises, the dog had been tested against aggression, distraction, and fear. It had never faltered, but this was different. The stakes were not just about safety, they were about revelation. Could the dog's instincts reveal the truth where humans could not? Could its calmness reassure the child and provide insight into what really happened? As the judge called the courtroom to order, the dog remained seated, every muscle alert but relaxed. It watched the child, who was still clutching the toy car, small fingers wrapped tightly around it. The child's gaze met the dog for a brief moment. A subtle connection passed between them, an unspoken understanding that would define the next crucial moments. Miller whispered softly to the dog, a simple, silent cue. The dog did not move, did not respond outwardly, but the subtle shift in its posture suggested awareness and readiness. This was the calm before the moment that could change everything. The courtroom held its breath. Every person in that room, from the judge to the officers to the family members, understood that this was not just a demonstration of obedience. It was an evaluation of instinct, empathy, and the extraordinary ability of a trained animal to perceive the nuances of human behavior. And in that silence, the dog's record of honor mattered more than anyone could have anticipated. Every rescue, every life saved, every tense moment it had faced in the past had prepared it for this. And now, years of training and service would be tested in a way no one had ever imagined, reading a 3-year-old's heart without a single word spoken. As the judge signaled for the proceedings to continue, all eyes turned to the center of the room. The dog remained poised, calm, and watchful, as if ready to reveal truths that no testimony could convey. Its presence alone altered the dynamic, bringing both tension and anticipation. It was more than a K9. It was a witness, an interpreter, a silent judge. And in a few moments it would speak in a language everyone could understand without uttering a single sound. The stage was set. The child, the courtroom, and the dog all aligned for a moment that would test instincts, reveal truths, and challenge assumptions. And no one, not the judge, the officers, or even the child's guardian, could predict exactly what would happen next. The courtroom had never felt quieter or heavier than it did that morning. Every person present seemed to be holding their breath, as if inhaling too deeply might disturb the delicate balance of the moment. The small boy sat beside his guardian, clinging to his toy car, fingers white from the tight grip. The police dog remained a few feet away, muscles relaxed yet ready, eyes fixed on the child with an intensity that was almost human. Even the judge, seasoned and unshakable, seemed unusually focused, his gaze shifting between the boy, the dog, and the silent courtroom that waited for him to speak. It was unprecedented. No one could recall a case where a trained police dog had been brought into a courtroom to observe a child in this manner. Lawyers, officers, and staff had debated the ethical and procedural implications for hours before the trial began. Some questioned whether it was safe. Others wondered if it was appropriate. Yet the alternative, relying solely on testimony from a 3-year-old who could barely speak, seemed impossible. The court needed clarity. It needed truth. And it had turned to instinct, trained in a K-9 with years of experience, as the most reliable form of witness. The judge cleared his throat and finally broke the silence. His voice, firm yet calm, carried through the room. This court recognizes the unique circumstances surrounding this case. Conventional testimony is insufficient. The child, due to his age and trauma, cannot adequately convey the events of that night. Therefore, after careful consideration and consultation with experts, the court has authorized a controlled interaction with the trained K-9 present in this room. Gasps rippled quietly across the gallery. Some officers exchanged nervous glances. A few of the family members blinked rapidly, trying to process the gravity of the decision. The boy's guardian tightened her hold on his small shoulder, whispering reassurances he barely acknowledged. The judge continued, "This interaction will be closely monitored. The K-9 will be under the full control of its handler at all times. No commands will be issued unless necessary for safety. The child will remain with his guardian throughout. All parties are reminded to remain calm and follow the court's instructions." Every word carried weight. The courtroom seemed suspended in a fragile bubble where past precedent no longer applied. Every step, every gesture, every glance was now magnified, as if the smallest misstep could shatter the fragile calm that had been established. Miller, the dog's handler, adjusted the leash in his hands. He could feel the dog's muscles tense ever so slightly, anticipation building. Years of training had prepared both of them for high-pressure situations, but this was different. This was not a chase, a suspect, or a crime scene. This was trust, conveyed through instinct, and it could not be commanded. It had to be earned in real time, guided by the animal's intuition. The defense attorney stood, addressing the judge with a voice that carried measured urgency. "Your Honor, while we understand the rationale, I must emphasize the importance of safety. The child is extremely sensitive to stimuli. Even minor stress could traumatize him further." The judge nodded. "Noted. That is why the guardian will remain beside the child at all times, and officers are strategically positioned to intervene if necessary. However, it is critical that we allow this interaction to proceed naturally. The truth of this case depends on it." The prosecution added nothing. They, too, understood that forcing words from a child or presuming danger where none existed would compromise the very purpose of this unprecedented decision. The courtroom was united in one silent acknowledgement. The next moments would reveal truths that no report, no testimony, and no statement could convey. As the judge gave final instructions, a hush fell over the room. The child shifted slightly in his chair, his small fingers rolling the toy car absent-mindedly. He had not yet noticed the dog, though it had been watching him for the entire session. The animal's dark, intelligent eyes flicked briefly toward him, then back to the room, analyzing, assessing, waiting. Then the judge signaled Miller to allow the dog to approach. Time seemed to stretch. Each step the dog took was deliberate, calculated, and graceful. The hardwood floors echoed faintly beneath its paws, though most in the courtroom barely noticed. Every officer held their breath. The boy's guardian leaned closer, whispering encouragement, but the child remained frozen, toy car clutched like a lifeline. The dog stopped a few feet away, sitting calmly, tail relaxed, yet eyes locked onto the child. There was no aggression. There was no barking. There was no lunging forward. Just an unwavering focus, the quiet, steady gaze of an animal trained to perceive truth where humans could not. The judge paused, glancing down at the small boy. It is now up to the child. There will be no force. There will be no direction. If he wishes to interact, he may do so. The boy's eyes widened. He had never been this close to a police dog outside of brief glimpses through windows or reports on television. Fear flickered across his face, mingled with curiosity. He studied the dog, noticing how still it remained, how its gaze was patient, unjudging. Slowly, ever so slowly, he extended a tiny hand toward the animal, gripping the toy car in his other. The courtroom collectively exhaled. Every observer leaned in. Cameras were off, yet the intensity of the moment was palpable. Every heartbeat seemed to echo in the stillness. Miller stayed perfectly still, letting the dog respond naturally. Years of training and trust guided the animal's behavior, yet nothing could prepare anyone for what happened next. The dog, sensing the child's hesitation, lowered its head slightly, a gesture of reassurance rather than dominance. Its posture communicated calm. Its eyes conveyed understanding. And in that silent, unspoken exchange, the first barrier between fear and trust began to dissolve. The child, emboldened by the dog's patience, took a tentative step closer. His guardian held a breath, ready to intervene if needed, but instinctively trusted the animal's reaction. The boy knelt slightly, toy car still in hand, and reached out his small fingers toward the dog's head. The dog did not flinch. It did not move. It remained steady, allowing the child to make the first contact. The tiniest of touches, a brush of a paw, a gentle nudge of the head, marked the beginning of an extraordinary bond. In that moment, the courtroom's tension shifted. What had been anticipation and anxiety transformed into awe. The judges, officers, lawyers, and family members were witnessing something rare. Instinct and empathy converging in a silent, mutual understanding. Miller whispered softly to the dog, a subtle cue only the two of them understood. The animal remained seated, responding minimally but with complete awareness. The child repeated the gesture, brushing his fingers across the dog's fur, eyes wide but unafraid. And for the first time in weeks, the boy's small frame seemed lighter, as though a fraction of the fear that had gripped him for so long had begun to lift. The judge observed quietly. "Proceed," he said, almost to himself. "Let the moment speak." Every person in the room understood that the truth, long obscured by fear, confusion, and assumptions, was about to be revealed, not through words, not through argument, but through instinct, trust, and the extraordinary ability of a trained K9 to perceive what humans could not. And in that courtroom, where silence had once been heavy and oppressive, hope now began to bloom. The courtroom was a fragile tension of anticipation. Every heartbeat felt amplified. Officers leaned slightly forward, their training telling them to be ready for any sudden movement, yet something about the scene commanded stillness. Lawyers and family members held their breaths as the 3-year-old boy, small and trembling, inched closer to the police dog. Every step he took was measured, tentative, as if he were crossing an invisible boundary between fear and curiosity. The dog remained seated, calm yet alert. Its eyes never left the child, observing the tiny movements, the subtle shifts in posture, the quivering of the small hands that clutched the toy car so tightly. Years of training told the handler that the dog could sense intention, fear, and innocence, but the courtroom environment was unique. Bright lights reflected off polished wood floors, every movement exaggerated, every whisper magnified, and yet the dog's instincts did not waver. The child's breathing was shallow. His eyes flickered between the faces of those in the room and the dog before him. He had seen police dogs before, on television in the neighborhood during brief encounters outside, but none had ever approached him like this, quietly, without command, without threat. He sensed something different, something patient, something safe. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the boy extended his hand. At first, it hovered in the air, trembling with uncertainty, inches from the dog's head. He paused, glanced back at his guardian, who gave him a slight nod of encouragement. The dog's ears twitched slightly, picking up the smallest signals of hesitation, yet it remained perfectly still. The silence in the room was so thick that it seemed to press against the walls. Even the faint hum of the overhead lights felt intrusive. People leaned forward in their seats, straining to witness the fragile exchange. Journalists in the back rows scribbled notes furiously, though none could truly capture the emotional weight of the moment. Then the boy's hand touched the dog's head. Just a light brush, barely enough to disturb the short fur, yet enough to set off a chain reaction that rippled through the courtroom. The dog responded not with a growl, bark, or pull, but by lowering its head slightly, a subtle gesture of reassurance. Its posture remained relaxed, its tail resting gently on the polished floor, and its eyes, large and intelligent, held nothing but calm. A collective exhale swept through the room. Even the judge, stoic and unflappable in countless cases, seemed to release the tension he had been holding in his chest. Officers straightened in their positions, some with subtle nods acknowledging the significance of the interaction. The child's guardian let go of a breath they had been holding for weeks, and the boy, sensing the dog's acceptance, relaxed slightly, his shoulders dropping from a rigid line of fear. The boy's curiosity grew. He leaned closer, brushing the dog's fur again, this time with a more confident gesture. The dog did not flinch. It did not move away. Instead, it allowed the child to explore, its calm demeanor radiating reassurance. Every small motion of the boy, the tilt of his head, the tremor of his fingers, was met with understanding from the dog. Miller, the handler, observed quietly. He had trained the dog for years to respond appropriately in high-pressure situations, but even he felt the weight of the moment. The K9's response was flawless, instinctual, and without coercion. It demonstrated patience, empathy, and understanding far beyond the abilities of many humans in the room. The child, now more comfortable, lowered himself to his knees, placing his toy car on the floor beside him. His small hands moved over the dog's head and back, exploring the texture of its fur. The dog shifted slightly to allow more contact, a silent invitation for trust and reassurance. For the first time since the incident weeks ago, the boy's face relaxed. His eyes lost some of the fear that had haunted him, replaced by awe and wonder. The courtroom watched in stunned silence. This was no longer just an interaction between child and dog. It was a revelation. The dog, trained to perceive threats, aggression, and fear, was communicating what the boy could not articulate in words. Innocence was being recognized and trust was being established. The judge leaned forward slightly, watching the subtle cues. His eyes followed the boy's hand across the dog's back, noting how the animal's posture remained calm. In his experience, trained police dogs rarely misjudged situations involving humans in distress. This behavior spoke volumes. In that moment, the courtroom understood that the dog had validated what everyone had been trying to discern through words and testimony alone. The child posed no threat. The child had been misunderstood, not dangerous, and certainly not responsible for the chaos of that night. Even the officers in the room felt the weight of realization. The K9 had acted not as a weapon or tool of force, but as an interpreter of human emotion. Its calm acceptance of the child conveyed a truth more convincingly than any testimony, report, or piece of evidence could have done. Slowly, the child began to smile. A small, hesitant curve of the lips, but enough to break the tension entirely. The dog remained seated, allowing the moment to unfold naturally. The boy's guardian brushed a tear from her cheek, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude. Weeks of fear and worry seemed to evaporate in that simple exchange. The dog gave a subtle nudge with its nose, an almost imperceptible gesture that was interpreted by all in the room as a sign of acknowledgement and trust. The child laughed softly, the sound small but filled with genuine joy. The transformation was astonishing. Fear, tension, and anxiety had been replaced by a fragile sense of safety and understanding. Miller whispered quietly to the dog, offering a word of praise, though it was hardly needed. The K9 had acted perfectly, relying solely on instincts honed through years of experience and training. The dog had read the child, understood his fear, and responded in a way that no human intervention could have achieved. The judge exhaled, realizing the significance of the moment. The interaction had done more than calm a child. It had revealed truth without words. The courtroom, which had been tense with anticipation, now felt an almost sacred quiet. People began to relax slightly, understanding that the pivotal moment had arrived. Every observer, from the attorneys to the officers to the family members, witnessed the quiet miracle. A child, too young to explain, had found connection and safety with a trained police dog. The dog, in turn, had done exactly what it had been trained to do: assess, observe, and respond appropriately to human behavior. In that instant, weeks of speculation, fear, and misunderstanding melted away. The courtroom had held its breath for this moment, and it had been rewarded with clarity and trust. Silence no longer felt oppressive, it felt triumphant, filled with relief and wonder. The child, now more relaxed, reached up and hugged the dog's head gently. The dog leaned slightly into the touch, a silent affirmation that all was safe. In that act, the audience understood a fundamental truth. Sometimes, words are not enough to reveal innocence, but instinct and empathy can speak volumes. It was a moment no one in the courtroom would ever forget. The courtroom had never been so quiet. After the extraordinary interaction between the 3-year-old and the police dog, the tension that had gripped everyone seemed to shift into a profound, collective awareness. The air felt different, lighter, yet charged with significance. No one spoke immediately, as if anyone could shatter the fragile understanding that had emerged between child and K9. The judge adjusted his glasses, observing the boy and the dog closely. He had presided over countless cases, but never one like this. In decades on the bench, he had seen guilt confessed, innocence claimed, evidence examined, and witnesses scrutinized. Yet nothing in all that time could have revealed truth so purely, so silently. In that moment it became clear. This was testimony without words. It was a language of instinct, patience, and empathy that could not be argued with or dismissed. Experts called in for the case began their formal observations. Behavioral psychologists and K9 trainers offered detailed analysis. One child psychologist stepped forward first, carefully explaining the significance of what had occurred. "The child's reactions demonstrate classic signs of trauma," she said. "Yet his ability to engage with the police dog indicates that he can differentiate between threat and safety. The dog's calm response reassures him, allowing his fear to subside. This interaction provides insight into the child's mental state that no verbal testimony could have conveyed." A K9 trainer followed, outlining the dog's behavior in precise terms. "This dog is highly trained," he said, voice steady. "It can detect fear, aggression, and even intent. In this case, the dog's reaction, or lack thereof, demonstrates that the child is not associated with threat or aggression. The dog read the child and found only innocence. In law enforcement terms, this is significant. It is a clear, unbiased indicator of the child's state." The courtroom listened, rapt. The implications were profound. A 3-year-old, too young to explain or testify, had been understood perfectly by an animal whose instincts had been honed over years of rigorous training. Words, reports, and witness statements, which had all been inconclusive, paled in comparison to what had just unfolded. Even the prosecutor, who had been skeptical at the start, leaned forward, clearly impressed. She scribbled notes, realizing that the interaction had shifted the entire trajectory of the case. The child's innocence was now evident, not through defense arguments or circumstantial evidence, but through a direct, instinctual reading by a trained professional animal. Miller, the handler, remained calm but proud. Years of experience had prepared him to manage dangerous situations, high-risk pursuits, and complex K9 interactions. Yet nothing had compared to the delicate balance required in this courtroom. He had trusted the dog's instincts, and the animal had delivered precisely what was needed: clarity, understanding, and truth. The judge finally spoke, his voice steady but reflective. "We have witnessed something remarkable today. The interaction between the child and the trained K9 has provided insight that words and testimony could not. The child's reactions, coupled with the dog's trained responses, indicate that this child is not responsible for the events that led to this case. He is, by all observable measures, innocent." A soft murmur rippled through the courtroom. Family members exhaled in relief, tears forming in the eyes of the boy's guardian. Officers nodded subtly, acknowledging the unique power of trained instinct. Lawyers leaned back, absorbing the gravity of a decision that no legal argument could have achieved alone. Experts continued to elaborate. The child psychologist explained how trauma often manifests physically rather than verbally, particularly in very young children. "Children this age," she said, "may be unable to articulate fear, guilt, or confusion. Their responses to trained animals, especially K9s, can provide reliable insight into their emotional state. In this case, the dog's behavior confirms that the child is neither guilty nor dangerous. This is invaluable information for the court." The K9 trainer added, "Dogs trained for law enforcement do not respond to social expectations or manipulation. Their responses are instinctual and consistent. When a child is perceived as a threat, the dog reacts. In this case, the dog's calm demeanor confirms the absence of threat. It is rare to witness such clear communication through behavior alone, but it has happened here." The courtroom absorbed these words in silence. The 3-year-old, now sitting slightly closer to the dog, seemed unaware of the profound impact of the moment. He played quietly with his toy car, occasionally glancing at the dog, who remained still and watchful. To the casual observer, it was simply a child and an animal. But to everyone present, it was the culmination of weeks of anxiety, speculation, and unanswered questions finally resolved through instinct rather than argument. The judge nodded slowly. "In light of this, the court finds that the child cannot be held responsible for any wrongdoing related to the events in question. Furthermore, the court recognizes the extraordinary contribution of the K9 in establishing this truth. The record should reflect the accuracy, reliability, and significance of this interaction." Officers and court staff exchanged subtle glances. This was not only unprecedented, it was historic. A trained K9 had, through instinct and observation, contributed directly to a legal determination of innocence. Legal scholars would later reference this case as an extraordinary example of nonverbal evidence. The child's guardian approached slowly, careful not to startle him, and whispered softly, "See, you're safe, you're okay." The boy's small hands lingered on the dog's head, then slowly released, as if understanding the reassurance offered by both the guardian and the animal. Miller stepped back slightly, giving the dog a quiet pat. The K9 remained calm, as though acknowledging the completion of its role. Its instincts had spoken, and the truth was clear. The courtroom, which had been tense, now seemed to release a collective sigh. For weeks, speculation, fear, and uncertainty had clouded judgment. Now, through the quiet, instinctual interaction between child and dog, clarity had been achieved. Innocence had been confirmed. Justice, in a way that transcended words, had been served. Even those who had been skeptical could not deny the power of the moment. The interaction had demonstrated something fundamental, that trust, patience, and instinct can reveal truths in ways that conventional evidence cannot. And in that quiet, solemn room, every observer understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a silent testimony that resonated more powerfully than any spoken argument could. The judge concluded, "This court will adjourn," noting the significance of the events witnessed here. The child is cleared of all suspicion, and the record will reflect the unprecedented and invaluable role of the K9 in establishing truth without words. As the gavel fell, the weight in the room seemed to lift. Officers straightened, lawyers relaxed, and family members embraced quietly. The child, small and innocent, remained unaware of the profound effect his presence had had on the court. He only knew instinctively that he was safe, that he was understood, and that the large dog beside him was no longer a threat but a friend. Miller guided the dog back to its handler position, the animal's movements calm and deliberate. It had completed its role flawlessly, having communicated a truth that no human testimony could have captured. Observers would later reflect on that day as a moment when instinct, training, and empathy converged in a way that changed the course of a case forever. For the first time since the ordeal began, hope and relief filled the room. Weeks of anxiety, speculation, and uncertainty were finally resolved. The child had been heard, not with words but with understanding. The K-9, trained for years to read threat and fear, had interpreted innocence with precision and compassion. And in the silence that followed, everyone understood the profound power of that connection. Truth, it seemed, sometimes comes without words. The courtroom was quiet, yet there was a weight in the air that felt different from the tense anticipation of the previous hours. It was heavier but not oppressive, more like the calm that follows a storm. Everyone present seemed to recognize the enormity of what had just occurred. Weeks of speculation, anxiety, and whispered doubts had led to this moment. The child, small and wide-eyed, sat beside his guardian, his fingers lightly touching the edge of his toy car. He had learned in the simplest way that he was safe. The judge adjusted his glasses, looking out over the room. Faces were calm now, yet attentive. Officers shifted slightly in their seats, lawyers exchanged subtle nods, and family members gripped one another's hands as though anchoring themselves to reality. This was more than a court proceeding. It was a demonstration of truth beyond words, a testament to empathy, instinct, and patience. After careful consideration of the evidence, testimony, and extraordinary interaction observed in this courtroom, the judge began, his voice steady but carrying emotion. This court finds that the child, age 3, is innocent of any wrongdoing related to the events in question. The record will reflect that the K-9 unit present during the original incident and during today's proceedings provided critical insight into the child's state of mind and behavior, confirming his innocence. A soft murmur passed through the gallery. Some observers blinked rapidly, overwhelmed by relief. The boy's guardian exhaled slowly, tears streaming down her cheeks, and leaned over to embrace him. "It's over," she whispered. "You're safe now." The child, sensing comfort and safety, clutched his toy car and buried his face briefly in her shoulder. Even in his silence, there was a visible lightness, a release of tension that had gripped him for weeks. The K-9, standing a few feet away, remained calm, yet its posture seemed almost proud, as if acknowledging the role it had played in this remarkable moment. Miller, the handler, gave a subtle nod to the judge, then gently patted the dog's neck. "Good work," he murmured. The dog's ears flicked slightly, and it sat back on its haunches, relaxed yet alert, having completed its part of the extraordinary process flawlessly. The defense attorney leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. "Your Honor," he said softly, "today has been unprecedented, but it is also a powerful example of how understanding, patience, and unconventional methods can reveal the truth. This child's innocence is now irrefutable." The prosecution nodded, acknowledging the unique circumstances. Even seasoned officers and court staff seemed to feel a shift in perspective. This case had demonstrated that the law, while grounded in evidence and procedure, could sometimes benefit from creativity, empathy, and reliance on instincts honed by years of training, whether human or animal. Outside the courtroom, news spread quickly. Journalists who had followed the story for weeks began to report the outcome, emphasizing the extraordinary role of the police dog in establishing the child's innocence. Online discussions erupted, with people expressing awe at the way instinct had spoken where words could not. Social media lit up with admiration for the K-9 and the unusual yet profoundly effective approach taken by the court. The child's guardian slowly helped him to stand. His legs wobbled slightly under his weight, a reminder of how small and fragile he truly was. He looked around the courtroom, then toward the dog, and a faint, tentative smile formed on his lips. In that smile was recognition, an understanding at the most basic level that he was safe, that he had been understood, and that the fear which had haunted him for weeks was lifting. The judge, watching quietly, made a final statement. Let today serve as a reminder that truth comes in many forms. Words, reports, and testimony are vital tools, but they are not always sufficient. Instinct, empathy, and patience can illuminate facts that might otherwise remain hidden. Let the record show that justice has been served through understanding, and that even the youngest among us are deserving of care, protection, and recognition of their innocence. Applause did not break out. It would have been inappropriate, but there was a palpable sense of relief and accomplishment in the room. The air felt lighter, the tension dissipated, replaced by a quiet reverence for the events that had unfolded. Every observer understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a story that would be remembered for years to come. Miller guided the dog back to its position beside him, leash loose, posture relaxed. The dog's role in the courtroom was over, yet its presence had left an indelible mark. It had been more than a witness. It had been an interpreter, a silent communicator of truth and emotion. Without the K-9, the court might never have fully understood the child's innocence. The child's guardian knelt to his level, brushing hair from his forehead. "Do you understand what just happened?" she asked softly. The boy shook his head slightly, too young to grasp the nuances of legal proceedings, but he reached for the dog's paw, holding it briefly before letting go. That simple gesture, innocent and unspoken, encapsulated the connection, trust, and understanding that had bridged fear and safety. As they began to leave the courtroom, the boy glanced back at the judge, the officers, and the dog. There was a momentary spark of recognition, as if he knew he had been part of something remarkable, even if he could not fully articulate it. For everyone else, that moment was a silent affirmation of the extraordinary power of instinct and empathy in revealing the truth. Weeks later, when reporters returned to the neighborhood to interview neighbors and family, the story was told over and over. A 3-year-old child had faced a situation far beyond his comprehension, yet had found safety and understanding through the instincts of a trained K-9. Experts analyzed the case, law schools debated the unconventional methods, and child psychologists praised the recognition of nonverbal communication. The event became a case study in the extraordinary ways animals can interpret human emotion and contribute to justice. In the small suburban home where the boy returned, life gradually returned to normal. He played with his toy car on the carpet, laughter spilling from his lips, occasional glances toward the front door where he knew officers and the dog had once entered. His guardian watched him carefully, grateful for the extraordinary events that had ensured his safety and innocence. Miller and the dog continued their work, deployed for other cases, other searches, and other emergencies. Yet the courtroom incident remained unforgettable for them, too. It was a testament to the bond between human and animal, the value of instinct in uncovering truth, and the ways in which patience and understanding could transform fear into clarity. The courtroom, once heavy with tension, had witnessed something historic. The innocence of a child confirmed not through words or evidence alone, but through the subtle, powerful understanding of a trained police dog. Justice had been served in a way few could have imagined, leaving all who were present with a profound lesson about trust, empathy, and the unspoken truths that sometimes only instinct can reveal. And for the 3-year-old boy, life had begun anew. Fear had been replaced by safety. Confusion had been replaced by understanding. And the simple, silent bond he had formed with the K-9 remained a testament to the extraordinary power of empathy, trust, and the quiet courage of a child facing a world far larger than himself. In that moment the courtroom had held its breath, and in doing so had witnessed something truly extraordinary. The truth had emerged and innocence had prevailed.